Hey, why is Noah's Ark in the news today? Well, a new study suggests that it really did exist. And this is important because it's a key part of the Bible. But scientists say they have evidence for it from an ancient Mesopotamian text. Now, you might think this story is just a crazy fable about a big boat and some animals. But for Christians, it's one of the most important stories in the Bible. And if it's true, then there are all kinds of other things that we might have to rethink as well. So what's the story? Well, according to the Bible, Noah was a man who lived 2,000 years ago, and God chose him to build an enormous boat, an ark, to save himself, his family, and two of every kind of animal, from a great flood that would wipe out all life on earth. After 40 days and 40 nights of rain, the world was completely underwater. But then after another 40 days, the waters receded, and Noah and his family emerged from the ark to start the human race anew. It's such a compelling story that many cultures around the world have their own versions of it. But for Christians, this story isn't just a myth. It's literally true. In fact, when you hear a preacher shouting about the rapture, the idea that Jesus will return to take believers away from the earth before some great calamity, they often cite Noah and the flood as proof that these kinds of predictions can come true. If God can save a handful of people and animals from a worldwide flood, then surely he can save Christians from whatever disaster is coming next. But if the story of Noah's Ark is false, then that whole idea falls apart. And that's where this new research comes in. Scientists say they've found evidence for the story of Noah's Ark in an ancient Mesopotamian text called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And they say that it proves that the story of Noah's Ark was real. In the story, there is a great flood, but only one man and his family are saved. Now, obviously, this isn't exactly the same as the story of Noah's Ark. There are some differences. For example, in the Bible, it says that God sent the flood because he was sorry that he had created humans. But in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods don't destroy the world because they're unhappy with humanity. They do it because they want to make a fresh start. Still, scholars have long recognized that these two stories must have a common source. Both stories come from the same general region and time period, and both stories are about a great flood that only a small group of people survive. So scholars have long suspected that the biblical story of Noah's Ark was based at least in part on the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But until now, no one has been able to prove it. What's more, some scholars have argued that the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh actually came first, which means that the biblical story of Noah's Ark was actually an adaptation of this earlier story. Of course, that doesn't prove that the story of Noah's Ark is true. It just shows that there were stories of a great flood going back thousands of years. But if you believe the Bible is literally true, then finding evidence for these stories in other ancient texts is pretty compelling. For Christians who believe that the Bible is literally true, finding evidence for the story of Noah's Ark in other ancient texts is pretty exciting. But for everyone else, it just shows that stories of a great flood have been around for thousands of years. Do you think the story of Noah's Ark is true? Let me know in the comments.